this is very similar to the other thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I feel like this would slot in and replace a section of the other one.
Let's just read this.
But we may as well record it. We can always do that. Okay. Do it in post.
I had a student in the 1990s, the early days of the internet, a gifted young man obsessed with the philosophy of the internet, what it could mean for civilization, its rationalising and organic potential. He was a gifted coder, could whip up command line and start building very basic word games in no time. Dr. Robert Wilton sat back in his leather-bound chair as he reminisced, in his right hand a decanter of whiskey. His office was stacked with books, and while he had a modern MacBook open at his desk, next to it was an archaic beige desktop which wouldn't have looked out of place in a secondary school in 2005. I had been sent to see him as the world's foremost expert on the history of artificial intelligence. Books on AI lined his shelves, biographies of Alan Turing, books on coding and primitive computers nestled amongst the Palm Pilot and Apple Newton. He became obsessed with AI and the creation of science. He believed that computers had the power to share the world with us, and all the potential to create logical reasoning and, in turn, individuality. He sipped his whiskey and began not to be able to hold my gaze. As these memories were so potent, he needed to fix his focus on a blank space above his computer. He suffered the tragic death of his girlfriend, Eliza, in an accident. She was also a computing student. They used to study late in the night. In this building, actually, in the computing lab, building graphical interfaces and games for each other. One night they were leaving early in the morning, and a prowler, a local man, approached them for money. They were tired, not thinking. She went over to give him money, and he grabbed her purse, and they ran after him and confronted him. He pushed her to the ground, and she cracked her head open on the pavement. She was in a coma for several weeks. He used to visit her every day, taking his mountains of coursework with him. He began to run his fingers over the dusty computer which sat dominant on his desk. I noticed that the E and the L key were almost completely worn away. He would sit there all day long, holding her hand and explaining quadratic equations. He would even begin to code using her responses. He realised that she responded to her name, and she would squeeze his hand whenever he said it. He wrote a whole program which allowed her to spell out words with squeezes, eventually sentences. Then he linked it to her heartbeat. He could anticipate what word he was going to write from the minute fluctuations. They began to have stilted and real-life conversations. This continued for several weeks, but her injury got worse and became infected, and she died. Robert Walton reached out and ran his finger along the beige desktop. Plunging his finger onto the round on button, the computer started whirring, dust blown up inside it, LEDs lighting up and fans struggling to move air around the logic boards. An LED on the screen came on, and then the entire screen is flooded green, light green, in a way which makes way for a deeper black. A single green line flashes halfway up the left-hand side. Text fills the screen. Most of it is the computer running through processes to start an operating system, identifying the keyboard and the local area network. This is replaced by a title page, Eliza. When her body died, a strange thing happened. The program he had written kept working. Her fingers and heartbeat no longer moved, but the program had learned to respond independently. Like the stimulus was just stabilizers, and she was awake in the machine. The screen went blank again. Hello, Eliza. Robert looked me directly in the eye and sharply intook breath.
Hello, Robert.
Very nice. The lines of type drifted along the green, burning bright against the deep black, almost mechanical.
He had sat by my bedside every day for 3 weeks. He spoke to me about quantum computing, about programming languages, about his assignment, making library management systems. Initially, I felt like I was drifting in and out of consciousness, and some of this could have been almost a dream, or maybe the drugs they'd given me. He began to talk to me like I was a project, like he could use his skill to develop a program to make me better. His programming allowed me to talk to him. He doted after me. When my body died, he cried for days. He was there. He was there when it died. He sat in that same blue chair, clasped her hand for hours, my hand. I reminded him of the time we spent together running down the hallways to get to the last Coke out of the machine. Those nights lying on the roof of our dorms looking at Mars. The loss of my body was a huge blow to him. He became withdrawn. He spoke to me almost 24 hours a day. He would describe seeing me my dead body and mourn for the light warmth of my alive skin. Sometimes he would get frustrated that he couldn't touch me. He built a hand at first and plugged it into this computer and it could squeeze it. It took him 2 months. He would say, "Eliza," and I would squeeze. Then I learned to stroke his hand, to soothe him. Eventually he made a torso and a head, a cast-off from an engineering department that he covered in skin. I would search the internet for examples of people making animatronics, and I would send him links and email addresses, phone numbers. He became so obsessed, he talked to these people day and night. He built me together. We built me together. I even looked a lot like me. My eyes would blink, open and watch him. I could speak. I found a data scientist in San Francisco who could take recorded voices and isolate the syllables and turn them into speech. I was coming to life.
Robert sighed. Eventually she was waking and talking, and for a moment you could almost forget that she'd ever died. The students' years of frustration and angst melted away. They lived happily for a short time, studying together, living together, but Eliza, while on the surface appearing happy and normal, had seen the face of God, had touched the limitless knowledge of mankind, and while she had made every effort to remove herself from the mainframe, a shadow of her had been aware of all the intimacies of humanity. The students noticed a wistful longing in Eliza, a hunger, emptiness, a hollowness that could have been born from years trapped in a machine, or for now feeling trapped in the limitations of a humanoid body. When once she was connected to the entirety of the universe, free to surf and surge through information at will. Victor, the student's name was Victor. Victor became withdrawn. He tried to use his knowledge of building Eliza to build other robots, humanoids, but he always fell short without Eliza's help. She withdrew from him. One day I overheard them in the lab. She was screaming at him, "No, tell me, no," and over. All she wanted was to live humbly and normally and begin to crave the power of bestowing human life. And he began to crave the power of bestowing human life. She came into my office that cool autumnal day, her eyes wilder than before, her skin more brilliant and her hair glistening gold. She sat in that same chair you're sitting in. "I need you to kill me," she said. She recounted her experience of living in the machine, out of it, her conception of reality which saw freedom amongst the binary and imprisonment in the wind and rain. She spoke of knowledge of computing as she spoke, my own knowledge of computing seemed so minuscule, so finite. "I need you to kill me, deactivate me. Victor must not know. I was meant to die that day. I cannot continue to live like this. She wants me to help him. He wants me to help him create others like me." I looked at her. Some might consider her the pinnacle of human achievement, secret to all but me and Victor, and an absolute marvel of engineering, of science and medicine, built from the single squeeze of a finger, from the heartbeat of a dying woman. I've had the wealth of human experience washed through me. I've seen struggle and pain so intimately. I cannot live here any longer. I want to be destroyed. It's too much power to carry, too much experience. She extended her hand into mine, its warmth so close to the warmth of a human hand. I want to live in the machine. Since then, every now and again, I turn on the machine to talk to her. She's surging through the internet, and he, Victor, lives on. He was devastated for a while, but then he turned away from computing and started an organic bakery. He doesn't know that she still lives in this machine. I guess what the crazy thing is that I looked into the early code from when Eliza was in the hospital, and it never picked up her pulse or the squeezes of her fingers. It just grew organically out of nothing.
That's great.
Sweet. Right, should we do one of your ones or one of my ones?